lived in Iraq. Come on.
Well, thank you, people of conscience from San Diego. It's so great to be with you. I also want to say thank you to the people, the brave people of Potrero, California. Anyone who has a question about whether or not a concerned group of people with their allies can change things or stand up to powerful institutions need look no further than the history of the struggle against Blackwater waged by a tiny town of 850 people. Blackwater now, if you ask them, they say, oh, it had nothing to do with the protests. It didn't fit our business model to set up shop in Potrero. Well, they spent, I think, about $1 million there, and they ultimately were run out of town by a group of 850 people that organized on a wide cross-section of issues that had to do with environmental concerns, with noise issues in their community, but also with what kind of corporation do you want representing your community? What kind of corporation do you want reflecting on your community or being present in your community? Yes, the issue right here, right now, it's a very local issue for the people of Otay Mesa, for the broader community of San Diego, but the issue is also bigger than that. This is a national issue and an international issue. We are not talking about a mom and pop hardware store that wants to set up shop in an industrial section of Otay Mesa. We are talking about a company with a notorious reputation around the world and at home. A company that is under federal investigation by the U.S. Justice Department over allegations that it killed innocent Iraqi civilians. It's under investigation on multiple levels by the United States Congress for its conduct both at home and abroad. This is a company that has been at the center of one of the most violent incidents against Iraqi civilians in the 5 years of the U.S. occupation of Iraq involving a private force. Now, there's almost no attention paid to this, but within minutes of Blackwater forces shooting 17 Iraqi civilians in Baghdad's Nisr Square last September 16th, a U.S. military unit responded, and Lieutenant Colonel Mike Tarsa and his men examined the crime scene. They interviewed witnesses, they examined shell casings, and what Lieutenant Colonel Mike Tarsa's men found was that that was a criminal incident. That was the term used by a U.S. military investigation to describe Blackwater's conduct in Nisr Square that day, a criminal incident. They said there was no evidence of any enemy fire against the Blackwater men and no evidence that units of the Iraqi police or military had participated in any kind of an ambush against Blackwater. And yet Blackwater and the State Department said that the company was the victim of an armed ambush by enemies and insurgents. The reality is that the U.S. military is saying that Blackwater was involved in criminal activity in Iraq. When the initial findings of federal agents sent by Bush, by his administration to Iraq, were leaked, the federal agents told the New York Times that they believe that 14 of the 17 Iraqis killed that day were killed as a result of unjustified and unprovoked gunfire. And a military official said, well, the FBI is being too generous to Blackwater. What we've seen is that the Bush administration at every turn has tried to cover up for this company. They offered the men alleged to have been the shooters that day something called limited use immunity, which is like the opposite of Miranda rights. If you're accused of killing someone and you read your Miranda rights, you're told you have the right to remain silent and anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. When the State Department investigators talked to the Blackwater men after Nisr Square, they gave statements and they said nothing you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Just to put this in a historical context, that's how Oliver North got off after Iran-Contra, is because he was given limited use immunity for his congressional testimony, and his lawyers said had they not used what he said in his testimony, they never would have been able to bring a case against him. And so we have these men that have been immunized, they have been above the law, they have been unaccountable, and there's no political will on the Bush administration to crack down on their operations. In fact, they continue to be rewarded with more and more contracts. Just this past April, despite the scandals, the allegations of killing innocent civilians, the investigation in the U.S. Congress, the investigation in the Justice Department, the Bush White House renewed Blackwater's Iraq contract for yet another year. This is a company that has made over $1 billion just in security contracts from Iraq. That doesn't count the work that they do for the U.S. Navy in the United States, for law enforcement, and it doesn't count the work that Blackwater's new private CIA is doing. One of their latest projects is that they have set up a private intelligence company called Total Intelligence Solutions that's being run by 3 veterans of the CIA. One of them, J. Cofer Black, was a 30-year veteran of the CIA. He ran the CIA's counterterrorism center after 9/11. He was at the center of some of the most brutal and violent policies of the Bush administration. He ran the Extraordinary Rendition Program, the government-sanctioned kidnap and torture program, and now he's running Eric Prince's private CIA based out of Arlington, Virginia. Robert Richer, the former Deputy Director of Operations at Central Intelligence, he's the number 2 man at that company. And Enrique Rick Prado, a veteran of the CIA paramilitary division and of Latin American operations, is the number 3 man at that company. So you have a reality that Blackwater operates in Iraq, Afghanistan, they have a private CIA, and now they're bidding for a share of a $15 billion contract with the Pentagon to, quote, fight terrorists with drug trade ties. What we have here is the so-called war on drugs, which really is a counterinsurgency war. It has been going all the way back to when the CIA overthrew Jacobo Arbenz in Guatemala in 1954, the dirty Contra Wars, the death squads in El Salvador and Nicaragua, and now we have U.S. mercenary companies that are being deployed in Latin America. The Colombian government spends half of its U.S. military aid hiring for-profit U.S. war corporations to fight the so-called war on drugs, which is really a counterinsurgency war. The reason I tell you all of these stories standing here across the street from Blackwater West is because when we look at the presence of this company in this community, it is not just a local issue. Certainly it is a local issue. There's no question about that. But when a company like this steps foot into a community, the community has a right to have its voice heard and not have a federal judge appointed by the president's father intervene in this matter. Now, separate from the legal process that is underway right now, separate from the battle of the city attorney, Mike Aguirre, separate from what Jerry Sanders is doing or not doing, we also have what's right. And what's right is transparency. And what's right is that a community has a right to self-determination. And the people of Potrero had to stand up for that right, just as the people of San Diego have the right to stand up for their right to self-determination. When a company such as this wants to set up shop, a stone's throw from the Tijuana International Airport, blocks away from the U.S.-Mexico border, when we have an unprecedented level of violence against migrants in this country, racism and xenophobia, and one of the radical privatizers of war wants to set up shop in your community, you have a right to ask them questions about their intentions here, and they have an obligation to stand before all of you and answer those questions. And so my request today is that people be unequivocal and passionate in their demand that there be transparency, that there be public hearing, and that the will of the people of Otay Mesa, of San Diego, and the broader community be respected. Thank you all for being here.
Jeremy Scahill, give him another round. We just lucked out and